The hotel always sounded different after midnight. During the day, it was full of small, busy noises, rolling suitcases, polite laughter, the ding of the elevator, shoes tapping across the marble floor. But now, at midnight, those sounds were gone. In their place was something softer, deeper. Almost like the building itself was breathing. Daniel sat behind the front desk, his elbows resting lightly on the polished wood. The lamp beside him cast a warm circle of yellow light, leaving the rest of the lobby in gentle shadow. Beyond the desk, tall windows looked out onto the quiet street, where the lamps glowed and nothing moved. He had been working the night shift for 3 years. At first, the hours had felt strange, unnatural, even. Sleeping during the day, waking when the sky darkened. But over time, Daniel had grown fond of the nights. They asked less of him. No forced smiles. No rushed conversations. Just patience, attention, and stillness. Tonight, the hotel was nearly empty. Only 6 rooms were occupied out of more than 60. Daniel knew this without checking the system. He always knew. The quiet had a certain weight when the building was mostly vacant. A lightness, too. The air smelled faintly of cleaning solution and old paper. Somewhere far above him, a pipe ticked softly as it cooled. The clock on the wall made a steady, comforting sound as its second hand moved forward, one small step at a time. Daniel opened the leather-bound notebook he kept beneath the desk. It wasn't required by the hotel. No manager had asked him to write anything down. But night shifts created thoughts that didn't like to stay trapped inside his head. He wrote slowly, carefully, letting the pen glide. Night feels like a pause between sentences, he wrote. Not an ending. Just a space. He stopped and listened. From the elevator shaft came a distant hum, just the building settling. Daniel glanced up instinctively, though he knew no one was there. The security camera monitors showed empty hallways, patterned carpet stretching into silence. He leaned back in his chair and exhaled. Some nights brought unexpected guests, late arrivals, tired travelers with sleepy eyes and quiet voices. Other nights, like this one, felt suspended in time. Daniel liked both, but he especially liked the second kind. There was comfort in knowing that nothing was about to happen. He stood and walked slowly across the lobby, his footsteps almost soundless on the carpet. The large painting behind the seating area, an abstract blend of blues and grays, seemed different at night. Calmer. As if it, too, preferred the dark. Daniel adjusted one of the armchairs that had been nudged slightly out of place earlier that day. He didn't have to. But small acts of order helped pass the hours. Behind the front desk, the coffee machine sat silent. He decided not to make any. The smell might break the spell. Returning to his chair, Daniel glanced at the guest log. No check-ins expected until morning. No wake-up calls scheduled. No special requests, a rare thing. He turned off the overhead lobby lights, leaving only the lamps. Shadows softened. Corners blurred. The hotel felt less like a workplace and more like a quiet shelter, something built to hold silence gently rather than push it away. Daniel rested his chin in his hand and stared at the revolving doors, their glass reflecting the lobby back at itself. For a moment, it felt as if he were watching another world, perfectly still, perfectly calm. The night stretched ahead of him, unhurried, and somewhere deep within the nearly empty hotel, the shift had truly begun. The clock reached 1 in the morning without ceremony. Daniel noticed it only because the minute hand aligned perfectly with the 12, creating a brief moment of visual balance. He liked noticing small things like that. The night offered them freely, as if rewards for paying attention. He rose from the chair again, stretching gently, careful not to disturb the quiet. His movements had become slower over the years, naturally adapting to the rhythm of the shift. Quick gestures felt too loud somehow, even when they made no sound. He walked toward the windows and looked outside. The street was empty now, the way streets only become after midnight, not abandoned, but resting. A light breeze moved a forgotten piece of paper along the sidewalk, pushing it forward and then letting it stop. Daniel watched until it settled near a lamppost and didn't move again. Inside, the hotel lights reflected faintly on the glass, layering one still image over another. Daniel returned to the desk and opened the computer, more out of habit than necessity. The system hummed quietly, the screen glowing softly in the dim lobby. He scanned the guest list again, reading names he already knew by heart. Room 214, an elderly woman who had checked in earlier that evening. She'd spoken slowly, her voice calm, her eyes kind but distant. Room 317, a business traveler. Already asleep by now, Daniel guessed. Room 402, a couple who had arrived just before sunset and barely spoken to each other since. Each name carried a story, even if Daniel never heard it. He closed the system and pulled a thin book from his bag, a collection of short essays he'd been reading in fragments, a few pages per night. He didn't rush through books anymore. Nights taught him that some things weren't meant to be finished quickly. He read a paragraph, then another. The words felt softer at this hour, less demanding. When his attention drifted, he allowed it. The book waited patiently in his hands. Somewhere above, a door closed gently. Not slammed. Just closed. Daniel looked up, listening. Footsteps followed, slow, careful, then fading again. A guest returning to their room, perhaps after getting water or pacing their thoughts away. Daniel felt a quiet sense of responsibility. Everyone in the building slept knowing someone was awake, that someone was him. He set the book aside and checked the security monitors again. Empty corridors. Dim lighting. Everything in its place. He adjusted the volume slightly lower, just enough so the faint static didn't intrude. Time passed in a way that was difficult to measure. At some point, Daniel brewed a cup of tea in the small back room. He chose chamomile, the steam rising gently, carrying a mild, comforting scent. He brought it back to the desk and took small sips, letting the warmth settle. The tea didn't rush him. Neither did the night. He thought briefly about how different this hour was for other people. Somewhere, someone was finishing a late conversation. Someone else was staring at a ceiling, unable to sleep. Another person might be driving through darkness, headlights cutting through the road, all of them moving, and here, everything was still. Daniel wrote another line in his notebook. Silence isn't empty, he wrote. It's full of pauses. He closed the notebook and rested his hands on the desk, fingers relaxed. The lamplight reflected off his watch face, ticking steadily forward. Each second passed without urgency. Outside, the breeze had stopped. The paper near the lamppost didn't move. Inside the nearly empty hotel, the night continued, unfolding slowly, gently, as if it had all the time in the world, and so did Daniel. At 1:47, the elevator moved. Daniel didn't look up right away. He felt it first, a soft change in the air, a barely noticeable vibration traveling through the floor and into the legs of the desk. The elevator didn't announce itself with a bell at this hour. It simply arrived, breathing out a gentle mechanical sigh as it slowed. He raised his eyes to the panel. The arrow glowed briefly, then went dark. No one stepped out. Daniel waited a few seconds longer than necessary, just in case. Sometimes guests hesitated inside, adjusting a coat or collecting a thought before entering the open space of the lobby. But the doors closed again without ceremony. And the elevator began its slow ascent. He smiled faintly. The building had its own habits, its own routines that continued whether or not anyone was watching. Daniel respected that. He believed places remembered things, footsteps, voices, pauses. The hotel remembered all of it and replayed the gentlest parts at night. He stood and walked toward the elevators, his reflection stretching and softening in the mirrored walls. The carpet muffled every step, turning motion into something almost imaginary. At the elevator bank, he placed a hand lightly against the cool metal of the door. It was smooth, steady, reliable. He didn't press any buttons. There was nowhere he needed to go. Standing there, he listened. From deep within the building came a low, continuous hum, the sound of systems working quietly so that others didn't have to think about them. Heating. Power. Air slowly circulating through unseen passages. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. In the dark behind his eyelids, the sound felt even softer. Like a distant ocean heard from inside a room. When he opened his eyes again, the lobby seemed unchanged, yet subtly different. Shadows had shifted. The lamps cast longer shapes now, stretching toward the center of the floor as if curious. He returned to the front desk and checked the time again. Nearly 2, the night was unfolding exactly as it should. He reached for the notebook once more but stopped halfway. Not every moment needed to be written down. Some were meant to pass through quietly, leaving only a faint impression behind. Instead, Daniel leaned back in the chair and folded his hands over his stomach. His breathing slowed to match the rhythm of the clock. In. Out. In. Out. He thought of the word caretaker. He wasn't guarding anything from danger. There was no threat, no tension. His role was simpler than that. He was there to notice. To remain present while others drifted elsewhere. A soft light flickered briefly near the ceiling, automatic sensors adjusting themselves. The hotel correcting its posture. Somewhere above, water began to run for a few seconds, then stopped. A guest half awake, perhaps unsure whether they were dreaming. Daniel hoped they would fall back asleep easily. He pictured the rooms, curtains drawn, bedside lamps off, small personal items resting on unfamiliar furniture. A jacket draped over a chair. A book left face down. A phone charging quietly on a desk. Lives temporarily paused. The lobby phone remained silent. Daniel glanced at it anyway, his fingers resting near the receiver. He liked being ready, even when readiness wasn't required. Outside, a cloud passed over the moon, dimming the light through the windows. The street grew darker. The lamppost suddenly more important. Daniel adjusted the lamp beside him just a little, turning the knob until the glow felt right. Not too bright. Not too dim. Balance mattered at night. He settled back into stillness, letting the hours move around him instead of through him. The elevator hummed again, far above now, then faded into nothing. the hotel breathed, and Daniel, awake and unhurried, breathed with it. A little after 2, Daniel decided to walk the 3rd floor. It wasn't required at that exact moment, but the night often suggested things gently, and he had learned to listen. He picked up the master key, its weight familiar in his palm, and moved toward the elevators. This time, he pressed the button. The elevator arrived with its usual quiet obedience. Inside, the lights were dimmer than those in the lobby, softened intentionally for tired eyes. Daniel stepped in and felt the doors close behind him with a hushed certainty, sealing off the lobby's calm and replacing it with a narrower, more enclosed silence. The ride upward was smooth. He watched the numbers change slowly, 2, then 3, and felt a subtle sense of transition, as if moving not just between floors, but between moods. The elevator opened onto the 3rd floor hallway, releasing him into a space that felt longer at night. The hallway lights were set low, creating a warm, amber glow along the carpet. Doors lined both sides, identical and evenly spaced, their numbers small and understated. The air here felt slightly cooler, touched with the faint scent of laundry soap and old fabric. Daniel walked slowly, his shoes barely making a sound. The carpet pattern guided his steps forward in gentle repetition. He passed door after door, each one closed, each one holding a sleeping world behind it. He didn't linger near any particular room. Privacy mattered, even in imagination. Halfway down the hall, he stopped. There was a window at the far end, narrow but tall, overlooking the back of the hotel. Moonlight filtered through, pale and calm, resting on the carpet like a thin blanket. Daniel stood there for a moment, looking out at the quiet shapes of trees and rooftops. Nothing moved. He rested his forehead lightly against the cool glass. It felt grounding. Real. The night outside seemed deeper from this height, less connected to human schedules. Somewhere beyond the trees, a road curved away, invisible but certain. Daniel liked thinking about unseen paths continuing on their own. He turned and continued walking. As he passed room 317, he noticed a faint line of light beneath the door. Someone was awake. Not in distress, just awake. The light was steady, calm, as if from a bedside lamp left unintentionally. Daniel slowed slightly, listening. No sounds. No movement. Just quiet awareness on both sides of the door. He moved on without stopping, leaving the moment undisturbed. At the end of the hallway, he paused again and checked the thermostat panel mounted on the wall. Everything was normal. Exactly where it should be. He smiled to himself. On his way back, Daniel noticed how the hallway seemed shorter now, less stretched. Familiarity did that. The space adjusted once it realized it was being cared for. Back in the elevator, he pressed the lobby button and watched the doors close once more. The descent felt slower somehow, like the building encouraging him not to rush. When the doors opened, the lobby welcomed him back without comment. The lamps were unchanged. The desk waited. The clock ticked on. Daniel returned the master key to its place and sat down, adjusting his chair until it felt right. He took a sip of the now lukewarm tea and didn't mind the taste. Some things were meant to cool. He wrote one more line in his notebook. Even empty hallways are full of rest. The pen paused, then the notebook closed. Outside, the cloud drifted away from the moon. Inside, the nearly empty hotel settled into an even deeper quiet. The night was far from over, and Daniel was exactly where he needed to be. The hour between 2 and 3 always felt different. It wasn't quite night anymore, but it wasn't close to morning either. It was a soft, hidden stretch of time, often forgotten, often unnoticed. Daniel felt especially present during this hour, as if the world had leaned back and trusted him to keep watch. He adjusted his posture in the chair and let his shoulders relax. The lobby clock glowed faintly. Its ticking seemed slower now, not because time had changed, but because nothing else competed with it. Each second arrived cleanly, then moved on without leaving a trace. Daniel glanced at the guest log again, tracing the list with his eyes. 6 occupied rooms. 6 quiet islands floating in the dark. He wondered, briefly, what each guest might be dreaming. Dreams felt closer at this hour, closer to the surface. Thin and delicate. He imagined them drifting gently through the corridors, careful not to wake anyone. A faint sound reached him, almost nothing. He tilted his head slightly. From somewhere above came the soft creak of a floorboard, followed by silence. The building speaking in its sleep. Daniel stood and stretched, raising his arms slowly, feeling the muscles respond without resistance. He had learned not to rush even the smallest movements. The night rewarded patience. He walked behind the desk and tidied a stack of brochures that no one would touch until morning. He aligned their edges carefully, pressing them into a neat row. The simple order felt satisfying. Behind the front desk, a small lamp illuminated a framed photograph, the hotel many years ago, its exterior unchanged but its surroundings less crowded. Daniel liked that picture. It reminded him that places could remain steady even as the world shifted around them. He picked up the phone and checked the voicemail out of habit. No new messages. He set the receiver down gently, as though it might be sleeping too. For a moment, he considered stepping outside. The night air sometimes helped sharpen the senses. But the idea passed quickly. The hotel felt complete as it was. Leaving it, even briefly, felt unnecessary. Instead, Daniel returned to the desk and rested his forearms on the surface, leaning forward slightly. The wood was cool beneath his skin. He listened, the hum of electricity, the distant whisper of air through vents, the slow, steady rhythm of his own breath. Nothing demanded his attention, and that, he realized, was a kind of gift. He opened his notebook once more, not to write, but to read earlier entries. Pages filled with small observations, fragments of nights much like this one. None of them dramatic. All of them true. He stopped on a line written months ago. Some hours don't want to be used. They want to be kept. Daniel closed the notebook carefully and placed it back beneath the desk. The clock moved closer to 3. Outside, far away, a dog barked once, then fell silent. The sound traveled faintly through the glass and disappeared into the lobby's stillness. Daniel smiled, barely. He felt anchored. Present. Awake in the gentlest possible way. Between 2 and 3, the world seemed to trust him the most, and he was happy to accept that quiet responsibility. Just before 3, Daniel noticed the cup. It sat on the small table near the seating area, half hidden by the shadow of a lamp. White porcelain. Thin handle. A saucer beneath it. The tea inside had gone untouched for some time, a faint ring marking where warmth once lingered. He was certain it hadn't been there earlier. Daniel didn't feel alarmed. The night rarely brought surprises that needed urgency. Instead, he felt a quiet curiosity, the kind that stayed calm and respectful. He stood and walked toward the table. The cup held chamomile, like the tea he'd made for himself. The scent was faint now, almost gone. No steam rose from it. Whoever had poured it had likely been awake an hour ago. Maybe more. Daniel looked around the lobby. The seating area was empty. The chairs sat exactly where he'd left them. The windows reflected only lamps and shadows. No one stood near the elevators. The doors were still. He reached down and gently touched the side of the cup. Cool. Someone had been here. Briefly. Quietly. And had left without a sound. Daniel picked up the cup and saucer together, careful not to clink the porcelain. He carried them behind the desk and set them beside the sink in the back room. There was no rush to wash them. Just returning them to a place of rest felt like enough. As he stepped back into the lobby, he felt the stillness settle again. As if the space had been waiting for that small correction, he checked the security monitors once more. On one screen, he noticed movement, slow and deliberate. A figure in the hallway on the second floor, walking toward the elevator. The person moved carefully, almost as if trying not to disturb the air around them. Daniel watched without leaning closer. The elevator light flickered on. The figure stepped inside. The doors closed. Moments later, the elevator arrived in the lobby. The doors opened. A man stepped out. He was perhaps in his late 40s, wearing a soft gray sweater and dark trousers. His posture was relaxed but slightly tired, as if sleep had nearly claimed him but not quite. He glanced around the lobby with gentle uncertainty, then noticed Daniel behind the desk. Their eyes met. "Good morning," Daniel said quietly, choosing the phrase carefully. The man smiled faintly. "I couldn't sleep," he replied, his voice low, respectful of the hour. "It happens," Daniel said. "Can I help you with anything?" The man shook his head. "No. I just walked for a bit. Made some tea. Then realized I wasn't really awake enough to drink it." Daniel nodded, understanding completely. "It's a good hour for walking," he said. "Not many interruptions." "That's what I thought," the man replied. He hesitated, then added, "Thank you for being here." Daniel felt the words settle warmly. "You're welcome," he said. The man returned to the elevator, this time without hesitation. The doors closed, and the arrow lit briefly as it began its ascent. Daniel watched until the light went out. The lobby felt slightly fuller now, not with noise or movement, but with a quiet sense of connection. Two people awake at the same uncommon hour, briefly sharing the same calm. He returned to his chair and sat down. The clock ticked forward. 3 in the morning arrived without announcement, just another second passing gently into the next. Daniel rested his hands on the desk and breathed. The night continued. Steady and kind, unfolding exactly as it wished. After 3, the night deepened. It was a subtle change, not something that could be pointed to or measured. Daniel felt it in the way the silence thickened slightly, like a blanket pulled higher. The hotel seemed to settle into itself, confident that nothing more was required for a while. Daniel adjusted the lamp again, turning it just a fraction lower. The glow softened, spreading gently across the desk and fading before it reached the edges of the lobby. Corners became suggestions rather than shapes. He liked it that way. He took another sip of tea. It was almost gone now, the cup light in his hand. The last mouthful tasted faint, barely there, but comforting all the same. The security monitors showed no movement. Hallways rested in quiet symmetry. The elevator remained still, its doors closed, its lights dimmed. Daniel leaned back and closed his eyes, not to sleep, just to listen. When his eyes were closed, the sounds rearranged themselves. The hum of electricity became a single, continuous note. The ticking clock faded into the background, no longer counting time but holding it in place. He imagined the hotel as something vast and patient, breathing slowly beneath him. A structure designed not just for people, but for pauses. For arrivals that would come later. For departures not yet imagined. He opened his eyes again. The revolving doors reflected the lobby in a gentle loop, light repeating itself without distortion. Daniel watched the reflection for a while, finding comfort in its predictability. Outside, the sky had changed. It was still dark, but the darkness felt thinner now, as if morning were waiting just beyond the horizon, not in a hurry. Daniel checked the clock. 3:22, this hour didn't belong to anyone else. It wasn't claimed by schedules or alarms. It simply existed, holding everything lightly. He reached for his notebook and wrote a single sentence: "Some hours don't pass. They stay." He closed the notebook and placed it carefully back under the desk. The man from earlier crossed his mind briefly. Daniel hoped he had fallen asleep easily this time, the quiet walk and warm tea doing their gentle work. A distant sound reached the lobby, so faint it might have been imagined. A train horn, far away. Or maybe the wind passing through a narrow space between buildings. Daniel didn't try to identify it. Some sounds were better left unnamed. He rose once more and took a slow walk around the lobby, checking doors, straightening a cushion, adjusting a brochure that had shifted slightly. Each action was small, deliberate, almost ceremonial. When he returned to the desk, he felt lighter. The clock continued its patient work. 3:30. The hotel remained nearly empty, and yet, it felt complete. Daniel sat, awake and unhurried, inside the hour that held everything, and the night, generous as ever, held him too. Somewhere between 3:30 and 4, the air changed again. Daniel noticed it the way one notices a familiar song reaching its final notes, quietly, without surprise. The hotel didn't look different, but it felt slightly less sealed, as if the night had loosened its grip just a little. He stood by the window and rested his hands on the cool frame. Outside, the streetlights still glowed, but the darkness behind them no longer felt endless. The sky carried a hint of depth now, a suggestion rather than a wall. Daniel knew this moment well. It came every night, whether he watched for it or not. He stepped back from the glass and returned to the desk. The lobby felt like a held breath. Daniel checked the system one more time. No new activity. No messages. No requests. He liked that the screen confirmed what he already knew. Technology, at its best, simply agreed with reality. He turned it off again. A faint creak sounded from above, soft, slow, untroubled. Someone turning in their sleep. Someone adjusting a blanket. The sound faded, leaving no echo. Daniel imagined the guests dreaming more deeply now. Dreams tended to grow heavier toward morning, less scattered, more complete. He hoped they were kind ones. He made a small note in the log, writing neatly, his handwriting steady despite the hour. Nothing to report. He paused, then added a small mark beside the date, a personal habit. Meaningless to anyone else. A sign that the night had been gentle. The lamps hummed softly. Daniel felt a familiar calm settle in his chest. This was his favorite part of the shift, not because anything happened, but because nothing needed to. The night had done its work. All that remained was to see it through. He poured himself a small amount of water and drank it slowly. The glass felt cool and grounding in his hand. When he finished, he rinsed it and set it upside down to dry, aligning it carefully with the others. Order again. Quietly restored, he returned to his chair and folded his hands, watching the clock move forward. Each minute slipped by without resistance. Outside, far in the distance, something stirred. A subtle sound, high and thin. Daniel smiled. The first bird. It wasn't loud or confident yet, just a single note testing the air, quickly swallowed by the remaining dark. But it was enough. A signal, not an announcement. He listened closely. A few minutes later, another sound joined it. Then silence again. The hotel didn't react. It remained in its nighttime posture, unhurried and calm. Morning could wait. Daniel leaned back and closed his eyes for a moment, letting the faint sounds pass through him. He felt neither tired nor alert, just present, balanced carefully between two halves of the day. When he opened his eyes, the lobby looked the same, but he knew better. The night was slowly, gently preparing to leave. The light arrived quietly. Daniel noticed it first as a change in reflection. The windows no longer showed only the lobby looking back at itself. A thin wash of color had begun to slip in, soft and uncertain, resting on the glass like a question. He stood and walked closer. Outside, the sky had shifted from deep black to a muted blue, uneven and delicate. It wasn't sunrise yet, not really. It was the moment before, when night loosens its hold without fully letting go. The streetlights still burned, unaware that their work was nearly done. Daniel felt a familiar mix of gratitude and release. The night had trusted him, and now it was beginning to pass that trust along. He turned off one of the lamps, then another, slowly rebalancing the light in the lobby. The space responded immediately, shapes becoming clearer, edges more defined. The hotel straightened itself, preparing to be seen. He checked the clock. 4:42. In less than 2 hours, the morning staff would arrive. Luggage would roll across the floor. Voices would return. The smell of coffee would fill the air. But for now, the quiet remained intact. Daniel returned to the desk and opened the notebook one last time. He didn't write much, just a single line. Morning doesn't rush. It waits. He closed the notebook and slid it into his bag. A door opened somewhere above, this time more confidently. Footsteps followed, less cautious than before. A guest, awake now for good, ready to rejoin the day. Daniel listened until the sound disappeared into an elevator hum. The building was waking up. He adjusted his uniform, smoothing the fabric, aligning his name badge. These small rituals helped mark the transition. Night work had its own form of care, and so did letting go. Outside, the sky lightened further. Pale gray blending into soft blue. The first real bird song rose, tentative but growing stronger. Daniel took a deep breath. He felt pleasantly tired now, not drained, but complete. The kind of tiredness that came from holding something gently and setting it down at the right moment. He powered on the system again and reviewed the final details of the shift. Everything was in order. Nothing missing. Nothing disturbed. The nearly empty hotel had remained whole. Daniel glanced around the lobby one more time, taking it in as it was now, between states, between breaths. The chairs, the desk, the doors. All familiar. All quietly changed. The night had left its mark, and soon, it would be someone else's turn. Daniel smiled softly as the early light continued to grow. One chapter of the day was ending, another was about to begin. By the time the sky reached a gentle, steady blue, the night had fully stepped aside. Daniel stood behind the desk, hands resting lightly on the smooth wood, watching the lobby come back into focus. Morning light filled the space differently than lamps ever could. It revealed details without asking permission: the faint scuff near the door, the soft pattern in the carpet, the true color of the walls. Nothing felt harsh. Just clear. The revolving doors turned slowly as a breeze moved through them, even though no one had entered yet. Daniel liked that motion. It meant the building was open again, ready to receive. He heard the familiar sound of keys at the staff entrance. A few minutes later, the morning receptionist stepped into the lobby, her footsteps brighter, quicker. She smiled when she saw Daniel. "Quiet night?" she asked, setting her bag down. Daniel nodded. "A gentle one." She didn't ask more. She didn't need to. People who worked mornings and nights understood that some shifts were better left summarized simply. Daniel logged out of the system and passed the desk over without ceremony. He gathered his things slowly, his notebook, his bag, his jacket. Each movement felt like a soft closing bracket. Before leaving, he took one last look around the lobby. Now it was fully awake, but something of the night still lingered. A calm beneath the surface. A memory of silence woven gently into the space. Daniel liked knowing that. He stepped outside. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the quiet promise of a new day. Somewhere nearby, birds sang with more confidence now, their voices no longer tentative. The street stretched out before him, beginning to fill with motion. Daniel paused for a moment, letting the morning settle. The nearly empty hotel stood behind him, unchanged and yet different. Having passed through another night intact, he adjusted his jacket and started walking home, unhurried. The night shift was over, but the calm it carried stayed with him, moving gently through the early light. Just like a story that ended exactly where it was meant to.